Everybody says I kicked his dog. It ain't that way around. You know, I kicked his ass, but not his dog.
Dave Mustaine always had two things on display: his talent and his aggression. He was never afraid to start a fight whenever and with whoever. This has led to him being misunderstood by many.
You little punk, I can't believe you did that. And then he stole a poster from her house and they blamed it on me.
But at 63 years of age, Dave Mustaine has not only named 9 artists he hated the most, but also explained why he felt that way. Starting our list at number 9 is an artist Mustaine hates for breaking his heart, James Hetfield. Dave Mustaine spent less than a year with Metallica. Despite working on so many parts of their debut album, Kill 'Em All, he was not a member of the band by the time they released it. He was kicked out of the band without warning.
I said no second chance, and you guys said no, go.
And to make matters worse, Metallica were in New York at the time. When he asked for a flight back to California, they told him he was taking the bus. That meant he was going to embark on a 4-day road trip while he dealt with the agony and pain of being let go by his band. James Hetfield was more or less the leader of the band, so if Dave ought to have directed his hatred and anger at somebody, it was him. What really made Dave upset with Dave was the excuse he gave for his dismissal. Dave does admit his alcohol addiction was a problem, and it was the reason why he would get aggressive and disruptive from time to time. But everyone on Metallica drank a lot, so being singled out to be used as a scapegoat felt like a punch in the gut. But the truth is, Hetfield had other reasons to get rid of Dave. One time during a band rehearsal, Dave brought his dog around. This turned out to be a bad idea, because aside from scratching up a bandmate's car, Dave's dog wasn't letting the band have smooth rehearsals. And this got on James's nerves so much that he punched the dog. Little did Dave know that this would add to the list of reasons why Hetfield wanted him gone. If he was overlooking his alcoholism, this was the nail in the coffin. But Dave hates this next person so much that he seems like the monster he despises. Artist number 8, David Ellefson. Surprisingly, David Ellefson is on this list. When Dave Mustaine had hit rock bottom after leaving Metallica, David Ellefson was the closest thing he had to a friend. He helped Dave rebuild things from scratch. They managed to turn Megadeth into a rock empire from nothing but just riffs and broken dreams. Given the premise of their friendship and partnership, it seemed that there was no way things could ever go sour between them. They had multiple successful albums, and they had cemented themselves in the rock and roll culture and accomplished what any rock band or group of artists would dream of. But things would soon take a turn for the worse. Mustaine got injured and this hindered his playing ability, but there would be something that would hurt him even more. David Ellefson was taking him and Megadeth to court. The issue? He wanted a bigger slice of the pie. He felt undervalued, underappreciated, and basically cheated. Ellefson strongly believed he deserved higher stakes in terms of the dividends. But Mustaine defended himself, saying that Ellefson was never truly an equal in their partnership. He was always the second fiddle, and even as far as being co-stars was concerned, Ellefson was more of a sidekick. The final verdict? A settlement that saw Ellefson get more dividends and rights. Ellefson later returned to the Megadeth ensemble as he expressed remorse for what he did. "It was the stupidest thing I ever did suing you. Dave, I forgive you." But were things really patched up and all good? Later developments suggested that they weren't. In 2021, when an inappropriate video of Ellefson hit the web, Mustaine knew that this was definitely not someone he wanted as a bandmate. He issued a public statement which said, "We are informing our fans that David Ellefson is no longer playing with Megadeth. We do not take this decision lightly." Asking for more from the band's revenue was something that could be contested, but sabotaging the band's image was something that Mustaine couldn't fathom. Mustaine felt the need to do damage control with what he told Metal Hammer concerning his relationship with Ellefson after the incident. "I'll forgive him 1,000 times. I just won't play music with him anymore. It was a hard decision that had to be made." While this statement suggested that there was no bad blood between them, Ellefson later revealed that he hadn't spoken to his former bandmate since 2001. And although this feels like forever, he's cool with it because he feels there's nothing to talk about. And that right there is the clearest indicator that they were no longer friends. And the drama of the last 2 decades had turned them into enemies. This next artist only made an enemy out of Mustaine because he hurt somebody close to him. And that would be artist number 7, Gene Simmons. As much as how villainous Dave Mustaine has been made out to be, there's no denying that he is somebody who sticks out for his friends.
You know, if I was at a party and I saw someone hit you again,
So, when anybody says anything mean about anybody close to him, he's ready to go to war. And it's for this reason that he nearly took Gene Simmons' head out. Gene Simmons already seems like the type of person that Mustaine wouldn't like. Kiss had a relatively easy rise to success. And given how Ace Frehley left the band, Dave has had to deal with a few people like Gene Simmons in his life. But what really sparked his hatred for the guitarist was a comment he made. During a 1991 Foundations forum in Los Angeles, the two rock stars got to have a chat. At the time, Kiss didn't didn't have a steady roster, and Dave Mustaine had been gone from Metallica for close to a decade. So when Dave asked him if there were any hopes of a Kiss reunion, Simmons gave a very sarcastic and mean answer. How about a Metallica reunion? You would think that this would have rubbed Dave the wrong way, given that he had left the band in what could be described as the most disgraceful way ever. But there was another reason he was upset about the comment. It was because Metallica's drummer, Cliff Burton, had lost his life horrifically in a car crash 5 years earlier, so suggesting a reunion back was a very insensitive thing to say. Cliff had died, you know, and I thought it was just not good for him. I don't know if it bothered me that much at the time. It doesn't bother me anymore. While this seems like a genuine reason to hate someone, Dave has hated people for less. Artist number 6, Kurt Cobain. Mustaine's dislike of what grunge represented had been openly confessed in print long before any tasteless quips. He summed up his worldview about the split between styles plainly in his memoir when he wrote, "Pop and metal aren't friends. Each knows exactly where the other lives and tries to keep its distance." Apart from having no regard for Nirvana's style of music, he had no regard for Nirvana's frontman either. In the wake of Kurt Cobain's passing, Mustaine had a very sensitive joke about the tragic news.
So today is like the anniversary of the death of Kurt Cobain. Do you feel like saying something?
It was a good aim.
Not liking an artist's music is one thing, but making remarks like that after his passing was beyond rude, and it was something that only someone who truly hated Kurt Cobain would attempt to do. The backlash that Mustaine received for this comment was enough for him to learn his lesson, and ever since then, anytime he has something to say about the late rock star, it's just nice words and appreciation. But while his words and outward gestures suggest that he doesn't hate him anymore, deep down it's still possible that he's disgusted by what Cobain represented. The best way to deal with this is to grow some thick skin. This is what artist number 5, Wes Borland, did. Given how much of a roller coaster his career has been, you would think that everybody Dave Mustaine hates has wronged him in one way or the other. But Wes Borland's only offense was existing and making his style of music. Dave Mustaine has been hailed as the architect of razor-edge thrash, and he has never been shy about calling out musical movements he thinks don't do right by the craft. In several interviews, he did not mince words about nu metal, the glinting, crowd-pleasing wave that swept the late 90s and early 2000s. He said, "There was a period in 2000 where we had these bands called, I think it was, nu metal, and they didn't do any solos. Well, why didn't they do any solos? They couldn't do solos. And thank God that genre went away." And although he didn't mention any names, he was obviously referring to the most prominent nu metal band at the time, Limp Bizkit, and their lead guitarist, Wes Borland. Mustaine amplified that theme again when he complained that the genre produced manufactured records, which, in his view, bypassed real musicianship. When a rock legend like Mustaine calls out your music like that, it's easy to get discredited, especially from critics and the media. But Wes Borland has shown that he's not fazed by the comments, stating, "I've always enjoyed the process more than the outcome." This suggested that Mustaine could hate all he wanted, but Wes was enjoying himself, and he wasn't going to let the opinion of an old metalhead change that. While this seems ridiculous, Dave has had some pretty valid reasons not to see eye to eye with a lot of people. And one good example of this is artist number 4, Axl Rose. Dave Mustaine may have been kicked out of Metallica because he was deemed as reckless. But if he hates someone because of their recklessness, then that just says how much of a careless person Axl Rose is. Dave's hatred for Axl Rose started in 1988 when Guns N' Roses were performing at the Monsters of Rock festival in the UK. It was supposed to be a glorious moment for Guns N' Roses as they performed in front of a crowd of over 100,000 people. But tragedy struck before Axl could savor the moment. The crowd didn't just get rowdy, they became wild and animalistic, climbing and trampling over each other. What felt like a dream performance quickly turned into a nightmare of a concert. Axl started shouting for them to get themselves in order, but it was too late. The show couldn't continue, and in the midst of the calamity, 2 fans lost their lives. And this would be a moment that would scar Guns N' Roses and also tarnish their image. And in Dave's eyes, Axl was a monster who could have done more to prevent it. So when Guns N' Roses were slated to perform alongside Megadeth at the 1991 Rock in Rio 2 concert, Dave wasn't too excited about it, and Axl himself was constantly avoiding the Megadeth guitarist because of the remarks he had made about the 1988 disaster of a festival. Axl recalls the time they performed on the same night, saying, "No matter how good the conversation or how well I thought things were going, some days later, he tried to stab me in the back just to grab a few media spotlights. He was someone I did not want to be around." Dave Mustaine appeared on a radio show where he exposed what Axl had said. He said things like there were deaths at the show and that Guns N' Roses shouldn't have played the night Megadeth played. But this wouldn't be the last time Dave Mustaine would say something to hurt Axl. In 2001, when Mustaine was promoting Megadeth's newest album titled The World world needs a hero, he promoted his upcoming work with a diss at Axl, saying, "I think that the world needs a hero because there are no more rock stars. Axl killed that." Aye. While it seems these two never worked things out, wait till you see how the next person ended up with Mustaine. Coming in at number 3, Tom Araya. The story begins on tour, under stage lights and frayed tempers. In the autumn of 1990, Megadeth and Slayer met on the Clash of the Titans tour, a gladiatorial run of arenas that ran from September 22, 1990 into 1991 and put two volatile bands on the same bill night after night. That proximity bred admiration, rivalry, and, quietly, grievances that would simmer for decades. Over time, the small things accrete into a pattern. Tom Araya has been unusually frank about how Mustaine behaved around other musicians, and he gave a memorable, cutting description years later. He talks a lot of smack, then he apologizes for it, then he continues talking smack, he said when asked about touring with Megadeth. This seemed like one of those scuffles that only happen in the heat of the moment, because when Tom Araya spoke about Megadeth's guitarist years later, it sounded more like mutual respect than anything. Artist number 2, Kirk Hammett. Dave resented the people who kicked him out, but seeing the person who replaced him made him sick to his stomach, and he sure hated him too. And this is what made Mustaine hate Hammett. Mustaine was kicked out of Metallica when they were in the middle of recording their debut album. And he didn't just record the guitar solos, he had written them. But with him out of the picture, Metallica didn't do away with his riffs. They just asked Mustaine's replacement, Kirk Hammett, to perform them again. Hearing his work on the album of a band that kicked him out was bad enough, but having it performed by his replacement, whom he knew was better than, was the ultimate slap on the face. For years, Mustaine's tone toward Hammett and Metallica was bitter, full of barbed humor and public jabs. In a 1985 interview, he complained that Hammett had ripped off every lead break I'd played. All the solos on that first record were mine. On early demos, a line that crystallized the sense that his work had been appropriated. This complaint, when paired with the humiliation of being abruptly dismissed, created an ember that kept flaring up in interviews over decades. But from Hammett's point of view, he didn't want to be the villain. He was just doing his job. Despite all this, he did understand where Dave was coming from, and he actually did sympathize with the Megadeth star. So it would appear that this feud was really one-sided. But soon it wouldn't remain this way. Mustaine would later go on to change his stance on things. He later realized that Kirk was really just doing his job, and hating on him was just putting him in the crossfire of a feud the guitarist didn't know much about. But the artist Mustaine hated the most is someone who he perhaps expected too much from, and that's Lars Ulrich. Lars Ulrich was also a culprit in getting Mustaine fired from Metallica, and why Dave particularly hates Lars for it is because Lars seemed like who he was closest to in the group. It felt as if anybody was going to stand up for Dave, it was going to be Lars, but Dave never got any form of support like that. Lars did confess his regret and how it wasn't easy, given how things unfolded.
And being very mellow, and I just remember I had this clear vision of just being overwhelmed with sadness and emotion.
In fact, it was very painful seeing Mustaine be so full of life and energy in the hours before they had to break the news to him. But this wouldn't be the only reason Dave Mustaine would hate Lars Ulrich. Years would pass, and Dave would eventually find success with Megadeth. Enough success for him to put what happened with Metallica behind him. But Dave still had nightmares of that dreadful night he was kicked out. And despite his best efforts, forgetting it would be impossible. Especially after he saw that the band used material he wrote for their debut album, it made him furious.
But watching for so many years, the band continued to become successful and successful and successful, and us to never address.
He demanded the royalties for the songs he wrote and threatened to sue them if he wasn't compensated for his work. Metallica not only refuted the claims, but also clowned Mustaine for them as well. And the fact that Mustaine never took things to court suggests that maybe he was reaching with his royalty claims. But what Mustaine described as hatred might have actually been a toxic obsession, because in the last couple of years, he has failed at trying to rekindle the bromance that they once shared by suggesting that Metallica and Megadeth share a stage. These ambitions don't require that much logistics, given how much they have in common, but it's Metallica that is maintaining its distance from their former bandmate, a move that continues to piss Mustaine off. Outro: now that the list is complete, who are you surprised to see featured? And do any of them seem like the villain, or was Dave the instigator? Let us know what you think in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on more videos like this.